That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, I promise you I'm going to do my best in this video. At the very top, I'm going to speak very briefly on guys like Cooper Kupp, Davante Adams. We don't need to talk about them. I will try to go as deep as I can, 30, 36 wide receivers. We don't have to go super deep because we're through all the bye weeks. Hopefully at this point, if you're in the fantasy football playoffs, you have a pretty strong wide receiver room, but I know that we'll have some decisions for the flex spots. But of course, thank you so much for coming out, hanging out with us in this video. Let me give away some free Fantasy Flock Network hats. As y'all know, we do every single video. The winners are going to be T-Mass and Rodeo Father. Thank y'all for going down there, dropping a like, leaving a comment on the last video. Remember, please support this channel. Drop that like, leave that comment, subscribe to the channel. And the most important way you can support this channel is by going and signing up for Underdog Fantasy, where y'all know we have so much going on. We're doing the player props every single week, even though embarrassingly we got crushed the past 2 weeks, lost so much money on those player props where we are profitable essentially all season. To now, we may be in the red. Now, it doesn't really matter because over there on Underdog Fantasy, they have a bunch of drafts that you can get in on a week-to-week basis. They have an NFL playoff draft contest you can get into. You can start drafting 2022 teams. There are so many things over there. We're crushing on the draft front. But when you sign up and you use promo code FLOCK, they'll match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. You can find the link in the live chat, find in the description of the video, find in the comment section, yada, yada, yada. Let's get into this and let's start it off with the top tier, Cooper Kupp, Davante Adams. I don't want to speak on this long at all. I mean, they're both averaging over 20 points per game. Cooper Kupp this past week on Monday night put up the most typical Cooper Kupp performance of all time. He drops about, 35 fantasy points. I'm sorry. He only drops 31. My bad. He has 13 receptions, 123 receiving yards, receiving touchdown. Davante Adams, very similar. The Green Bay Packers offense obviously rolling. And Davante Adams has 13 targets, 10 receptions, 121 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. We don't need to talk about this. Let's go down to tier 2. Let's go over to Justin Jefferson leading us off here. With Justin Jefferson, I am expecting that we are not going to have Adam Thielen in Minnesota this week. Obviously, Justin Jefferson, was a pretty solid wide receiver. He drops a casual 20 fantasy points, but what is fantastic is back-to-back weeks with Justin Jefferson getting a ridiculous amount of volume in Minnesota. 14 targets 2 weeks ago, 15 targets this past week. Chicago, I know people want to say, oh, this defense is great. This defense just gave up 45 points to the Green Bay Packers. Not too worried. Justin Jefferson will be our wide receiver 3. And I know a lot of people are not going to like this next call. We're going to go over and have Chris Godwin as our wide receiver 4. Y'all know we loved Chris Godwin in drafts this year. We have them on so many teams that are in the playoffs. He better be coming through for us. But back-to-back weeks with insane target volume, just like we're discussing with Justin Jefferson. And now he should not draw the Marshawn Lattimore matchup. I'd imagine that's going to be going over to Mike Evans. And here with Chris Godwin, 17 targets 2 weeks ago, 15 targets this past week. He drops 20 and 30 points in those games respectively without a touchdown. Those touchdowns will come. You know that if he's going to continue to see this kind of volume in this offense, play Chris Godwin as a top 5 wide receiver. And then our wide receiver 5, the last guy in this tier. Actually, I don't know if we can have him in this year. I know he's been disappointing over the past few weeks. Tyreek Hill. Now, yes, he was disappointing 2 weeks ago against the Broncos. Now, yes, he was disappointing this past week, but this past week, just take that game, throw it out the window. That was not even a football game. I'm imagining this will be a competitive contest against the Los Angeles Chargers on Thursday night. And while, yes, Tyreek Hill is a little bit more volatile than some of those other wide receivers at the top, his ceiling is going to be a little bit higher than what you'll have with other players, say, like a Justin Jefferson. I don't think Justin Jefferson is going to get to the 50 points in a single game that we've seen from Tyreek Hill before. So I think we can have them in the same tier. Maybe you can make the argument to have Tyreek Hill one tier below. But now let's go to that tier below. Let's go over to Stefon Diggs in a tough matchup here. Now, I have not seen the most recent report on Emmanuel Sanders. Let me look this up. As of now, I'm assuming that Emmanuel Sanders is not going to be someone we're having playing. Yeah, so Emmanuel Sanders came out about 6 hours ago. Emmanuel Sanders will not be playing in Week 15. So I think you're completely fine to go through and start Stefon Diggs as that elite level wide receiver. He has trailed off a little bit as of late. He did get 13 targets this past week. Obviously, Emmanuel Sanders was someone coming out and playing pretty much every single snap. I don't think Gabriel Davis is going to see that same kind of target volume, so I think you can bump up Stefon Diggs, even though it's a little bit of a tougher matchup here. And then our wide receiver 7 will be Deontay Johnson going up against the Tennessee Titans. With Deontay Johnson, It's just targets. Y'all know I don't necessarily think he's an extremely talented wide receiver in terms of his yard after the catch ability, in terms of the efficiency he'll give you on a per target basis. But just going through this season, Diontae Johnson, looking at the amount of targets that he has had, 10, 12, 13, 2, 13, 13, 6, 13, 13, 13, 14, 11, and 10. This man is a target hog in a PPR format. I mean, he is crushing. He's had 81 receptions while missing, a week earlier this year as well. This is a wide receiver that is averaging over 10 targets a game. Go through, play Diontae Johnson everywhere you can. Don't really care about the offense struggling. And then our last player, we'll be a little bit more excited about him this week than we were last week. Deebo Samuel. With Deebo Samuel going up against the Atlanta Falcons, A, it's a good matchup, and B, Deebo Samuel should be slightly more healthy. And it's kind of funny coming into the season, we were talking about the fact that Deebo Samuel and his average depth of target made him look a little bit more like a running back based on the fact that if you looked at 2019, if you looked at 2020, and you looked at his average depth of target and how he was used in San Francisco, literally he was so far below any other wide receiver that you were looking at him next to players like J.D. McKissick with his average depth of target. And we were going, Deebo Samuel is a fancy running back here. Well, looks like we may actually have been right about that. Over the past month, Deebo Samuel, 3, and I repeat, 3 receptions. And if you're doing the same thing over with carries over the past month, 22. 22 carries, 3 receptions. Looking like a running back if you ask me. Nonetheless, it doesn't really matter because when he gets those carries, if you want to call him a running back, it's in the most creative way possible. He's getting them in high efficiency type situations. So he's going to continue to score touchdowns. It's a good matchup. And why I like him a little bit more this week is because he should be fully healed from that groin injury or close to it. So I'm going to be excited about Deebo Samuel. And now our next tier down, we are going to go over to a wide receiver that we told everybody to start this past week, and it was pretty ugly, not going to lie. Let's go over to DeAndre Hopkins. Yes, DeAndre Hopkins. He only drops about 11 fantasy points this past week. Sorry for everybody. I'm sorry for telling everybody to go through and play him, but at the end of the day, I don't feel that bad about it. He did draw 12 targets in one of the most productive offenses in the NFL. Now, yes, having a very tough defensive matchup last week, of course, against the Rams and Ramsey, but I'm sorry, not Ramsey, just against the Los Angeles Rams. But nonetheless, this week should be significantly easier. Going to be going up against the Detroit Lions here. Perfectly fine to go through and play DeAndre Hopkins. And now our next wide receiver 10 will be CeeDee Lamb. Also another wide receiver with a week that really didn't stand out. Yes, he does come out. Yes, he does get you the 14 fantasy points, but he's not getting up to that 20-point mark. Now, it's kind of nice to see that he hits double-digit targets in a week where you have, Amari Cooper fully healthy, Michael Gallup fully healthy, Dalton Schultz fully healthy, because this is the situation that we're going into now. And, with the New York Giants, not too worried about this matchup. The one thing I could possibly be worried about is the Dallas Cowboys just kind of sweeping the floor with the Giants here and not necessarily even having to look to throw the ball in the second half at all. Maybe they just run it over and over and over again. Right now they are 10-point favorites in this contest, but the Giants are playing at home. Now, our next wide receiver in this tier, I'm telling you right now, this is going to be a long tier of players, is going to be Keenan Allen going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. Allen should be good to go by the time we get to Thursday night. And I'd imagine with Keenan Allen here, he should be just fully healthy. It's not like a Deebo Samuel situation last week where he's coming back from a groin injury, a soft tissue injury. Maybe you have to be concerned. No, Keenan Allen going to be a target hog in this Los Angeles Chargers offense. Now, our next wide receiver, we can actually drop this down a tier. The way this cuts out, I think we can drop it down a tier. We'll have Mike Evans at wide receiver 12 going up against the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, this has been a matchup that historically Mike Evans does struggle with. I know a lot of people are going to be screaming, oh, Lattimore, you got to bench him. No, you can't bench Mike Evans. As we've said time and time again this season, it doesn't matter what the matchup he draws is because he is playing in one of, if not the most productive passing offenses in the NFL. He's an auto start. Tom Brady's going to be able to overcome this matchup. I know back in week 8, whatever, you had the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New Orleans Saints going on not Thursday night. They went on Halloween night. We were actually going through and I was with my family and I went to visit the little ones trick-or-treating. And it was crazy because obviously I live in Tampa now, and you were just walking down the street and it was Halloween night and everybody had like on projectors in their driveway, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game. Everybody here loves the Bucs. But nonetheless, yes, in that game, you did have Tampa struggling a little bit. Tampa did lose that game, I believe. But here they are going to be playing in Tampa, and they are 10.5-point favorites. Not too concerned with this, to be completely honest. And now our next wide receiver in this tier is going to be going over to Hunter Renfrow, who will be a little bit dependent. Now with Hunter Renfrow, I am ranking him as if we have no Darren Waller. And as we've said, time and time again, Hunter Renfrow in an offense with no Darren Waller is a must-start league-winning player for you because he will be someone that comes out and dominates in targets. Now, please keep in mind that with Hunter Renfrow here, it is clear to see the difference in this offense with and without Waller. Without Waller, Hunter Renfrow has able to go with 3 straight 100-yard performances. He's been able to get to double-digit targets twice, which he's never done in his NFL career before. So he's getting the volume, and he is transitioning that volume over to fantasy production. So Hunter Renfrow is going to be continued as a low-end wide receiver 1. This past week, he was at high-end wide receiver 1. But he'll be right there any game that Darren Waller does not play. But if we get Waller back in, I think you have to be slightly concerned. I think maybe you have to move down Hunter Renfrow just to being a mid wide receiver 2 instead. And that's when you can question, should we put him in our flex spot? What should we be doing here? And our last wide receiver in this tier, y'all know we continue to rank him as the wide receiver 1 in Cincinnati, Ja'Marr Chase. Yes, Ja'Marr Chase was a sell-high player for us at the beginning of the season whenever he was dropping 200-yard performances. And yes, he was a buy-low wide receiver for us a few weeks ago whenever he had a string of games where he was coming away with 10, 13, 6 fantasy points. And the reason for that is with Ja'Marr Chase, you look at the role that he has in Cincinnati. If you look at, how this offense operates, Ja'Marr Chase has been the same the entire season. Nothing is different with Ja'Marr Chase here. He comes out, drops 25 points this past week. I feel the exact same way about him as I did 2 weeks ago when he dropped 6 points against the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's a wide receiver that should win off of talent and efficiency. He's not a wide receiver like Keenan Allen who's going to win off of pure volume. So with these wide receivers winning off efficiency, their ceilings are going to be a little bit higher. Go back to what you had against the Baltimore Ravens where he drops 8 receptions and over 200 receiving yards. But the floor is going to be a little bit lower, as in, he has had multiple games with single-digit fantasy performances where Keenan Allen has not had a single one. Nonetheless, Ja'Marr Chase, not changing my opinion on him, still going to be that low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. Tough matchup against the Denver Broncos. Now our next wide receiver, Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 15, going up against the Rams. Don't love it. I'm assuming we get Ramsey on DK Metcalf. With Lockett, very similar here. This is a wide receiver that it's not like he's coming out and dominating DK Metcalf with the amount of targets that he is getting in Seattle. It's more so that Tyler Lockett, has just been more efficient with those targets as of late. He drops 26 points against the Texans this past week off of 9 targets and obviously the long ball. I want to say this is not going to continue. I don't think it's going to be Lockett way up here, Metcalf way down here for the rest of the season. I think they'll close the gap just a little bit, but definitely have to have Lockett in this range for now. And then our next player is actually going to be T. Higgins, wide receiver 16. He's going to be the second guy in this tier, 1 tier below Ja'Marr Chase. And with T. Higgins going up against the Denver Broncos, as we've discussed, tough matchup. And with T. Higgins, how he was a buy low wide receiver for us time and time again in the middle of the season. And then whenever people thought he was the wide receiver 1 in Cincinnati, that's the time to sell. These wide receivers are exactly who you thought they were. T. Higgins comes out this past week. He has a great week against the 49ers. Now, he doesn't get the touchdown, so yes, Ja'Marr Chase outproduces him, but he does get 7 targets, 5 receptions. He leads the team in receiving yards with 114. So they're still going to be neck and neck. They're still going to have Ja'Marr Chase at wide receiver 1, T. Higgins at wide receiver 2 in this offense, as we did a week ago, but they're still right next to each other. And then our last wide receiver in this tier will be Amari Cooper going up against the Giants. With the Dallas Cowboys, they're effectively going to be able to move the ball down the field with no problem this week. The question is, are they having to throw the ball in the second half? Hopefully we get Daniel Jones in here, but the way it sounds, probably not going to. Now let's go down a tier of players. Let's go over to wide receiver 18. Let's talk a little bit about Jalen Waddle here. Obviously, Waddle was on the bye this past week, so you didn't get to see Jalen Waddle come out here and dominate, but Waddle has been dominant so far this season. He's had 114 targets through 13 weeks as a rookie wide receiver here. And if you're looking at the season-long production where he's had over 200 fantasy points already, it's honestly a little bit skewed. Because remember, we had Jacoby Brissett for the majority of the time in Miami this season. And I'm not the biggest Tua Tagovailoa fan, but I can definitely say that Tua is drastically better than Jacoby Brissett. So yeah, we're going to go through. We're going to be looking to play Jalen Waddle with aggression. Not going to be worried about this matchup whatsoever against the New York Jets. Now, I know everybody wants to hop on the Miami Dolphins train, and I agree with you. The Dolphins are a lot better than the Jets, but I don't think this is going to be a case where the spread on this game is like 14, 15 points. The spread on this game right now is looking like it's going to be about 8.5. And now our next wide receiver will be Brandon Aiyuk going up against the Atlanta Falcons. I think Aiyuk is going to be a fine play this week. He has been dominant in San Francisco as of late with, I hate to say it, but can someone prove me wrong? Deebo Samuel is essentially the running back in this offense now. Deebo Samuel, like we said, over the past 3 weeks, he's had like 22 carries and 3 receptions. Well, I mean, Brandon Aiyuk, he's been the guy coming out here, and he's been the player that is dominating with the targets. 6, 11, and 7 targets over the past month. I mean, 18 fantasy points this past week. Brandon Aiyuk looks like the wide receiver you thought he was coming into the year, and not worried about this Atlanta Falcons defense at all. Now, our next wide receiver, we will have Hollywood Brown going up against the Green Bay Packers. As of now, we simply don't know what's going to be happening with Lamar Jackson. This will be something we have to continue to monitor. I know the replacement and Tyler Huntley this past week, he did look okay, but he's not Lamar. Like, definitely want Lamar Jackson to be able to play this week. The initial reports are he avoided the high ankle sprain, and he is going to be out there against the Packers. I want to see the practice reports this week, and I'm imagining even if he is out there, this offense is probably going to take a step down because obviously it's built around Lamar's mobility. And now, let's go down another tier. Let's go over to our wide receiver 21, which will be DK Metcalf against the Los Angeles Rams. I don't know if Metcalf is going to draw Ramsey. I don't know if you're going to have Lockett drawing Ramsey. With Metcalf, I know he's been unbelievably disappointing as this entire offense, I mean, obviously hasn't been great, but I mean, he has been drawing the targets. He's right there neck and neck with Tyler Lockett every single week with the roles these wide receivers have in this offense. I mean, over the past 5 weeks, he's had 4 of those weeks getting exactly 8 targets in Seattle. With DK Metcalf, obviously, he's an elite level athlete. I mean, this is a player that has the elite size as well. I think you can go through and you can continue to start DK Metcalf. And our wide receiver 22, Brandon Cooks going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Really not a fan of Brandon Cooks at this point. Obviously, this offense looks really bad. Davis Mills, I guess, actually is, better than Tyrod Taylor. And y'all know, I mean, coming into the season, how much we were laughing at Davis Mills here. But nonetheless, this should be a decent matchup where if the Houston Texans are ever able to move the ball down the field, it should be this week in particular. I was a little bit surprised to see that the Texans are actually going to be 3.5-point dogs in this game. I actually thought that this would be a game where maybe the Texans were favored over Jacksonville based on what you saw from Jacksonville last week. It is what it is. Should be a close contest, which I think Brandon Cooks kind of needs. And then our last wide receiver in this tier is going to be Michael Pittman. I mean, with Michael Pittman, obviously he is a much better wide receiver than the majority of players here. The issue, however, is going up against the New England Patriots. This Patriots defense has been so damn good. Now, of course, you have to put some context behind the production that we have had from New England as of late. But still, I mean, to look at this, New England, let's go through the past month or so. This past week against the Buffalo Bills, yes, the weather was atrocious. I get it. But 10 points for the Bills. 13 points for the Titans the week before that. 0 points for the Falcons the week before that. 7 points for the Browns the week before that. 6 points for the Panthers the week before that. 24 for the Chargers. 13 for the Jets. Now, yes, a lot of those teams are horrible. Now, yes, I understand that. But give Bill Belichick an extra week with the bye. I think it's going to be really hard for this Indianapolis Colts offense. Obviously, they have Jonathan Taylor. You play Jonathan Taylor. I think Michael Pittman, maybe we just take a step back from, though. And now let's go down another tier. Let's go over to our wide receiver 24. This is going to be Odell Beckham Jr. going up against the Seattle Seahawks. Now, with Odell, not going to lie, this past week we were screaming, Van Jefferson's the wide receiver you want. You have to bench Odell, bench Odell, bench Odell, play Van Jefferson. And Odell came out. He had more targets. I mean, Odell definitely played the role. He had 6 receptions, 77 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. I want to say at this point, we've seen it. Now we know Odell Beckham Jr. is the wide receiver 2 here for the Los Angeles Rams. And it's going to be an elite level offense. I don't love the matchup against the Seattle Seahawks because we know Seattle wants to slow the game down. But still, I think Odell is going to be that fringe player now. And then wide receiver 25, we got Mike Williams. Mike Williams, an elite level ceiling, a very low floor. I don't think you're getting anything in between. I really thought that with no Keenan Allen this past week, that Mike Williams was going to be a player that just saw a completely different role. I thought Mike Williams was going to be a safe guy to get 10 plus targets. That didn't happen. And instead, you had Josh Palmer and Jalen Guyton coming out here and dominating, and it felt bad because we told everybody to go through and bench Jalen Guyton, and Guyton came away with 17 fantasy points. Now, honestly, I don't regret saying it because with Jalen Guyton here, I mean, his role really didn't change either with no Keenan Allen. He had 3 targets. He's just a field-stretching wide receiver, as we've discussed so many times before, and he gets behind the defense for one of those big plays, gets the 59-yard touchdown. That's why Jalen Guyton was productive this past week. It was actually Josh Palmer who was able to come out, and Josh Palmer, I mean, had a much larger role where he was able to get 7 targets. His previous average was about 2 targets a game. So Josh Palmer was the guy that took that step up. 3rd-round pick out of Tennessee this past season. Nonetheless, we don't need to get into that. Mike Williams, high floor, low ceiling. DJ Moore, our next wide receiver going up against Buffalo. I mean, Robbie Anderson looked like he may be the wide receiver 1 in Carolina. I'm not buying it, and I'm not buying any pass catcher in this Carolina Panthers offense with a very tough matchup against the Buffalo Bills. I would be looking to avoid. And then our next wide receiver, a tier down here, it's going to be Julio Jones going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now with Julio, I know that if you're looking at the snaps this past week, yes, he was taken out of the game. I think it was probably just because if you have Julio Jones, the last thing you need is him going out there and risking another hamstring injury. So instead of beating the Jags 20-0, you can beat the Jags 23-0. Like, what are we talking about here? I mean, they just took Julio Jones out because that game was so out of hand. They had no chance to lose, as they should. Should be a closer competition against the Pittsburgh Steelers this week. Now, our next wide receiver will be Van Jefferson as well, going up against the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, this is going to be a very productive offense, with Van Jefferson looking a little bit more like the deep threat here in Los Angeles, where I do believe Odell Beckham Jr. is going to be more of that prototypical wide receiver 2 flanker now. And our wide receiver 29 will be Chase Claypool going up against the Tennessee Titans. With Claypool, I kind of feel bad for having him this low. I think you could make an argument to have Chase Claypool a little bit higher than this. This past week, he does draw 9 targets, but the week before that, he had 3 against the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, this offense is going to be a little bit tied up here. And our last wide receiver in this tier will be another one of those long shot, high upside players, definitely with the low floor. However, this will be Darnell Mooney. I mean, with Darnell Mooney, he sees that step back with Allen Robinson coming in. And, I mean, the Chicago Bears put up like 30 points this past week, and he only drops 2.5 himself. I think Darnell Mooney, you probably have to go through, avoid playing him everywhere. You know what? Can we scratch this, Thomas? Can we just take Darnell Mooney off this, and instead can we go through and throw up Marquez Valdes-Scantling? Because I definitely would play Marquez Valdes-Scantling over Darnell Mooney at this point. And yeah, that's all I got for y'all. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I really hope you got something from it. Please go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, letting me know how stupid I am. And when you do that, you get entered in to win a free Fantasy Flock Network hat. Subscribe to the channel. Go check out some of those drafts. Check out some of those player props on Underdog Fantasy. And yeah, that's all I got for you. I really hope you have a great day, and I hope to see you out with the live stream sometime soon.